on to the water quality compensation, and I will defer to Manager Gore.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'll have a couple of comments and then turn it over to the board. I know Trustee Hines had requested this item be placed on a future agenda. What staff did in order to prepare for this meeting is staff just surveyed some of the surrounding communities to find out, to provide information to the board in your decision-making process to see if any other municipalities had provided any type of compensation for residents when there was an issue with water quality. The only one we were able to find is the one incident in Oswego, which was related to one particular resident. So that's out of 2, 4, 6, 8 municipalities that we had contacted. With that, staff is prepared to answer any questions or address any issues that the board has. So with that, I turn it over to all of you.
Any comments?
I think we owe them people some kind of compensation. I really do. Now they got trouble again, I see in the paper this morning.
Anybody else's?
I had a question for Director Zopel. Would it be okay to do a percentage, monetary percentage, or just a dollar amount?
If you were going to consider doing some sort of rebate, I would recommend a flat dollar amount. That'd be much easier administratively for us to do.
Okay. So I guess the first question is, are we in favor of a compensation? And then the second question is, how much would it be, I guess? Right?
Any other thoughts? Anybody else?
Can we sufficiently describe the people that have really been impacted by this? How would we ensure that we've been fair? And
I find that's the problem in my mind.
Yeah, I can ask Director Pubens. I mean, we have track of those who contacted the Public Works Department. Is that correct, Director Pubens?
That's correct to some degree. We have record of 52 households contacting us directly. As you remember, we sent a letter to a much larger group. That was 881 households that received the letter. That was a conservative area. We wanted to pick an area large enough to hit what at the time we thought all the affected homes might be. But again, our list, and it's not to say that it's perfect, but we had 52.
I have a question. How many people outside of that area have complained about any problem with their water in the last 2 or 3 years? Ballpark. A little, a lot?
Compared to the 52, I would say about half.
Over 2 years?
Over 2 or 3 years, maybe less, a little less than half. But we've had some water quality issues, temporary water quality issues, crop up from time to time.
So my biggest issue with this is that I understand that there's people that were impacted by this, but there are people outside of that area that have been impacted by this for 2 or 3 years. Just for transparency, I live down on K Street. K Street has had a water quality problem for the better part of 2 or 3 years that we've worked on. I've been reluctant to comment on that publicly just because I didn't want there to be the appearance of conflict of interest. But I know that my neighbors on my street would be the first ones to call up the village tomorrow morning if we decided to give compensation. You're not talking about 2 months, you're talking about 3 years worth. So we have to be fair to everybody. That's my biggest concern. And we spent more than $100 and some odd $1,000 fixing this problem. I think that would be the biggest goal is to solve the problem as quick as we could. And my last concern would be that if you're going to give people 1 month, that amounts to $25, does that really compensate them for any problem that they may have had? Or is that a slap in the face to say, here's a small amount?
Well, that's better than doing nothing for them.
Well, we did more than nothing. We spent a considerable amount of money fixing that well and overtime.
Well, it had to be fixed. You got to give them water.
They had water.
So that's the village's job to keep that thing running, right?
Any other comments?
Well, we have to get it down to a certain area. And Mike, you may have had 52 letters, but maybe the guy next door to one of those 52 just because he didn't write a letter or didn't phone in, he's got the same problem. So I would like to see you put an area, and I think we all know where the area is, around at Ashland, around where Ricky Mason lives, around that one area. I really don't think there was 700 people, 700 houses involved in this, but I would like to see, if it's 75, I'm sure it'll probably be under 100 houses, the way it looks in that area. And then the next thing is, the one lady brought us what she thought would be compensation at $54, which, like I mentioned before, here we're telling people to use more water, and yet we're charging them for it. So I think we should have some kind of reimbursement to those people, like a credit of $75 to all those people in that area, or some amount such as that, so that they would have it for the water that they had to use. I'm not sure, like Matt's problem is just the people on K Street. I think if we take one area at a time, it's better than blanketing everybody, because that's definitely going to be, I can say I've got a house that's, my water meter's 33, so that's how old my house is. It's been there since 1900. I've got water problems too with my pipes at times, but I should, as old of a house as it is. So, it's just, I'm not going to get involved in people around this area, although you definitely have a problem on K Street, but that should be really fixed on its own. And these people here should be reimbursed on their own, the ones that had the problem.
But Trustee Lee, I think from a staff perspective, whatever process that if the board wants to go down this path, it has to be universal so that we can apply it to different situations. So whether it's in Boulder Hill or whether it's in the corporate limits of the village. And I think if you're going to look at some type of policy, you also have to look at a time element, because you have the difference of a limited amount of time where residents in Boulder Hill in a certain area were impacted versus one of the streets in the corporate limits of the village which were impacted a longer period of time. So we would be asking as staff, if you're going down that path, for how is this going to apply across the board?
Trustee Beck?
My comment would be that we've got at least two different situations, and actually multiple situations here. K Street and a number of other areas in the village are due primarily to dead ends. We've talked about addressing some of these long-standing problems with looping and similar solutions. There's always 10 times the projects to the amount of money that's available to complete them. Excuse me. We've tried to prioritize some of this. I think what comes into effect here with the Boulder Hill situation is that we have a pretty good idea of the geographical area that was affected by this. What comes to mind is a lot of times in Chicago, there will be a bus that'll hit something, and there's 60 seats on that bus, and you have 700 people show up in an emergency room with a sore neck saying that they were on that bus. I think that's not necessarily the same situation here, but on the other hand, we know exactly the area that was affected with the problems we had with the well. And I would certainly want to look at that and then come up with some flat fee or whatever, as suggested by Director Zofel, as to how to compensate for that. And quite frankly, I think the K Street, that's just a separate issue that has to be addressed onto itself. That wasn't a result of what happened with this well here recently.
Jeff, would it be easier to put a credit on so many bills? That'd be the easiest way?
That would probably be the easiest, yes, just put a credit on the bills. And that's why it's easier to do a flat fee than having to go into each person's bill and calculate a percentage. Right. We just do a flat credit.
Director Pubens, could you estimate the number of accounts that we're talking about per Trustee Lee's question? Are we talking 100, 700, 800 homes? Any idea?
No, there's 52. Didn't you say there's 52 houses in that area?
There were 52 that contacted us. They're not all adjacent to each other. They're spread throughout an area in Boulder Hill. It's not as large as the 881, but it wouldn't be as small as the 52. I would say if I had to take just a ballpark guess tonight, if you want me to throw out a number, several hundred, 200. If you're trying to identify the houses that contacted us, taking into account Trustee Lee's thought that if this guy called and this guy called, there's probably somebody in the middle that had a problem but didn't call, and drawing a line around that area, so we would include the 52 most likely, and we would include others that didn't contact us but we thought had a high likelihood of experiencing problems based on what their neighbors encountered.
Yeah, I think that in a lot of cases, they had, in a neighborhood or a block, they had one spokesperson for the whole area. I know the one gentleman that spoke one night, he was speaking for his whole end of his block and across the street. And so, you know, I don't think we can use that initial number of people that contacted. You know, I don't think that would be fair. I'm just trying to think of something that's fair to everybody.
I can certainly put together that type of map for you to consider. Again, that final line will be somewhat subjective.
Maybe that's what we should do.
Another thought I would have is, rather than trying to cover and paint everything, so to speak, with a broad brush here and trying to come up with every eventuality with a policy, I think this is something that warrants individual treatment. I think this is something that, you know, it's a situation that we can isolate. We can come up with a pretty good estimate of the affected households there. In order to be fair, then include everyone. And we did have people come in that were saying that what was said before about, you know, I know everybody on my whole block has the same thing, and that's probably true. Because I mean, you know, you're either upstream or downstream from someone that's having a problem. Chances are you're having that same problem. But I would rather treat, you know, the Boulder Hill as one incident and try and come up with something I think that's fair and equitable. I think we do have to do something, and I think that would be the best way, is just isolate that area and then come up with a flat credit that we would agree to for each one of the households affected in that area, rather than trying to think of every situation anywhere in the village that's had water problems and try and cover it with one solution.
So just cover part of the people with problems. How's that fair?
Yeah,
Well,
I'd like to get the
again, you know,
water
just
problem solved
K Street
first.
was mentioned, and K Street is a looping issue, and
that's what some of these folks had said down there too. So
I know they said
I'm trying to
that
understand how it's
one,
fair to just talk about reimbursement. And just to be clear, I would in no way take any sort of reimbursement, but we've probably had more than 100 or 200 different emails into staff over the last 2 or 3 years just on my street. So to say, you know what, that one's a separate issue because they're not here tonight, that's not fair.
No, I don't think that. I think it's a
No,
separate
that's not what I'm
issue
saying.
as far as the first issue is get the water straightened in the Boulder Hill area. The second issue is get that problem solved as far as the reimbursement and get done with it. I mean, we've talked on other issues. We brought it up, like I've said, sometimes 7, 8 times at different different meetings, and you just get. I just want to get this solved so the people know there's a resolution. And then, Matt, if you want to bring up you got like 10, 12 houses there, you should be able to bring that one up, and we can talk about that one. But because I think that is a problem down there. And you're in the same boat. You have certain residents that will talk, and certain residents of yours won't say a word. And you know they're all having the same problem. And then, like Bill said, it's a looping area. But I think I'd like to get this problem solved first and then worry. You know, and the one lady said she thought 54 would be fair. I'd go as high as 75 or around there to pay for the water people had to buy or use or whatever. But you got to remember, I didn't know it was 200 houses. I mean, that's adding up.
I'm going by what.
Well, see, I don't know how. That's where I'm having a problem. Is how do we
That's Mike to figure out where those roads are where the
map
people
maybe
have problems.
with the streets or something like that?
I think our first effort would be to plot the known locations on a map and see what kind of area it guides us to. And it's, again, it will take interpretation and judgment on someone's part to say in or out, because it won't, they're not all in a cluster. And if I could just add, water in Boulder Hill is $6.03 per 1,000 gallons. So when you're talking reimbursement, I don't know if you would, I think if we reviewed all the water accounts, you would not see that much additional water use. Certainly people used extra water to flush their mains or their internal plumbing.
Well, I'm saying too, for the water they had to buy, the towels they may had to buy. I'm just giving a rough estimate where, yeah, they feel like maybe they aren't breaking even, but maybe they came closer. Yeah, the chemicals they had to buy, it'd be closer, not just saying it's just for the water, just for their problems.
Understood, and I just wanted to clarify that point on the quantity of water that we're talking about.
I have one additional question. In doing this, are we kind of admitting that the well 14 was the problem? That this caused the rust problem?
I don't think we're at a point where we can say that.
Good answer.
In finality.
And then I guess that was my second question. Out of the people that are in this room who live in Boulder Hill, is the problem gone completely? Because
I can tell you that it is not. We've had phone calls over the last several weeks.
So now
we had a period where the system and the water quality had kind of reached that equilibrium, and that's not to say that it was perfect in every section of town, but we'd gotten back to square one. In the last 2 to 3 weeks, we're starting to see a trend towards some rust issues again. Jack Rosensteel and I are working along with Engineer Waller's staff and our water chemistry consultants on what changes we can make. I think the final explanation may be some time out, in that time period being the time we spend completing the well 14 work, which is back up and running, but the lime softening plant is still offline. We had the water issue there, plus we're doing some repair work, and we've got, well 8. So there are a lot of parts in motion on this, and we may never have a definitive answer. I think we'll be able to give you some reasons that we're confident in.
May I make one comment?
Yes, sure.
Just one suggestion for you. Your question kind of prompted it from my thought process. I totally understand the desire to provide an acknowledgement monetarily of the inconvenience that the people have gone through. Mm-hmm. I would not encourage you to characterize it as a reimbursement for damages or something like that, because I don't think it's wise for the village to do that. You have never guaranteed water production. If this is now reimbursable, then when the water goes out, periodically, which happens to all of us, are we going to reimburse for the hotel room that they had to get because they couldn't live there? I don't think you want to do that. So I think this is a goodwill gesture that you're talking about. So pick a number, as opposed to try to characterize it as, this is what we're reimbursing you for. That's my only suggestion.
I had a quick one.
Good comment.
We're looks like we're going to reimburse these people X amount of dollars, okay, for the situation that just happened last month. Let's say it comes back like it already has. Are we going to reimburse them again?
That's what I'm asking.
Because I know at K Street, that's on the plan to get looped for next year, if I understand, correct?
No.
We're going to loop that?
It'll be in a proposal. It's up to the board to
Okay.
ultimately determine what
loop it?
gets looped.
Maybe.
I'm sorry, not looped.
Oh.
Yeah, it's just to replace the 2-inch line that's at the end, so it's a partial replacement.
Okay. Now, the people in Boulder Hill, there is nothing for them to be looped to. I mean, when are we going to talk about looping them?
Well, at the March 14th, I don't know if that's a board or a committee of the whole meeting, but we'll be presenting the CIP portion of the budget. And at that time, Engineer Wallers and I will lay out some options for consideration. We're currently, Pete's staff is documenting all the dead ends in the system, documenting all the undersized lines, and trying to put some dollar cost numbers to that. So at the very least, you'll understand the scope, both physically and financially, as to what we're looking at.
Now, the other question I had for Director Pubens or Engineer Wallers, let's say we loop the water mains in Boulder Hill. Is that going to solve the problem because they're still cast iron?
I would not, I do not believe that it will guarantee perfectly clear water the day we open that loop. The water mains in Boulder Hill and some other parts of Montgomery are quite old. They're cast iron. They have rust deposits on them now. So I would not guarantee absolutely clear water. I think it'll help. If we don't think it's going to help in some way, we won't recommend that we do the work. But to answer your question, no, I would not guarantee that.
Can the previous board that's been here for a while, can you guys help me out? Because didn't we have the water rates in Boulder Hill higher to replace the water mains stuff to get them up to date, or is that just, I don't know, is that something we,
At one
you guys?
point in time, which we haven't been able to do, the last 2 years, we appropriated money to replace water mains. The water, because they're not incorporated, has always been more.
I'm talking previously,
That's what I'm talking
before,
about.
not the last 2 years.
No,
I thought that was why they're,
I'm talking about that.
okay.
They've always been, it's always been, what, higher?
Yeah.
President McLean, it has been higher. I believe when I started in 2000, it was it one,
2 to 1.
2 to 1, twice
2 to
as high in
1,
Boulder
right.
Hill.
Mm-hmm.
That cost difference or price difference was based on our belief, the village's belief, that it costs more to produce and deliver water to Boulder Hill, primarily because of the main break situation. At the time, we were probably in the 80-plus range on main breaks. Now, with the most recent water rate increase, that differential has come down
Yes.
to,
With the one Monday, if it were enacted, we'd be at 1.25 to 1 would be the ratio, down from 2 to 1.
so that difference has come down quite a bit. And again, in part based on actual cost to produce and deliver water to different areas.
Not necessarily for maintenance purposes. I mean, it was never earmarked as such.
Well, we did provide and have done quite a bit of replacements in Boulder Hill already, and we can bring you the list of main replacements that have been done. And you may recall that with the exception of, I think, maybe 1 year that we gapped the program, we did approximately $250,000 a year in replacements. And we targeted the stretch of main that had the most breaks per foot was really the criteria. So when it became the highest maintenance section of water main in the village, and typically that was in Boulder Hill, then that was the one that was targeted as the first to replace. And that's how we approached the program for a number of years. And I'll get in March, I can present the history of what we did replace and why. And we continue to maintain that database. We collect the break data every year. We then put that back into our spreadsheet, and we list the top 10 sections of water main that are in line to be replaced. And that's how Mike and I decide, where is our best expenditure of money. So that process has been going on, and I think it's been effective, too. If you look, and it's not a huge change, but we've seen a decline in water main breaks over time, and I think that will continue. But, at $250,000 per year, you're not going to get to the end. It takes a long time to replace all your water main.
Yeah, we're not going to we can look at all the loopings, and there's a lot of them, and we're not going to, no matter what they come up with, we're not going to finish all of them. And you have to remember when Pete did the prices of 10 local towns around here, even using Boulder Hill as a separate town, Mike, their price is a little higher than ours. They were like in 4th or 5th out of 10. We were like at 9 out of 10 as far as the cheapest. So it's just a case that you're right. We were higher and we're closing the gap between the two, but we had 9 water breaks last weekend or whatever it was, I think, Mike, and Oswego don't have 9 in a whole year. So we're doing 9 in one area compared to, so there's naturally got to be a cost factor here. I mean, we inherited their problems, and the next boards will inherited the problems on Case and by my house and Boulder Hill. It's just a fact.
Yeah, and then something else I would throw in there too. Engineer Wallers, maybe off the top of your head, what is there, maybe $50 million worth of main out there?
In fact, we just, actually, Mike and I just looked at it. I think it is close to 50 million. And of the mains that we see breaks on, those are let me back up. We think there's about $50 million worth of main that we see break on, have breaks on them. So that's the number.
Okay, the point to make is, all right, $50 million worth of mains that were not put in properly out there. You got to remember, if you're from the area here, Don Dice built that out there, and he took every shortcut he could when Boulder Hill was built, and especially when it came to putting in cast iron instead of malleable iron and everything else, and then he profited from that. And yet, how many 50 years later, we're the ones that are trying to deal with the shortcomings that he consciously made a choice on. And at $250,000 a year, I can't quite do the math, but what's that? 60 years to replace that at $250,000 a year, or 200, whatever it is, whatever the math is. No, it's just huge, and there's just no way we can do $5 million worth of main replacement out in Boulder Hill every year to speed up the process to get the malleable iron in place there. And it's frustrating for me as an official here to sit here and listen to the problems, but on the other hand, again, there's so many projects and there's only so much money each year. And we had tried to adopt a process where we have a continuing, ongoing, predictable program to replace some of these infrastructure. And again, in the meantime, we're still suffering with the problems that come from the mains that are out there. And in another 20 years, they'll be 70 years old instead of 50 years old. So figure, some of that's going to accelerate, I would think, the deterioration then.
That's why I brought the question up. Even though we loop it, it's still going to solve the problem, especially in Boulder Hill. They're all ductile iron, and we replace it with something else. You still have the ductile iron pipes there.
Cast iron.
Or cast iron.
Cast iron.
You're still going to have the same problem. Maybe, I don't know. I guess you can't guarantee.
I guess to move forward on this, we will have Director Pubitz come back with a map of the area, and in the meantime, hopefully we can arrive at a number and look at the map that we know where the problems are. Is that feasible?
Yes.
Just as a point of clarification, Madam President, does the board want to provide a dollar amount on the compensation, or do you want us as staff to come back with options to you?
Is it possible to come back with options of about 2 or 3 and what the impact is, and how does that sound? Let's say we have 3
give us some
options based on
You approximately know what that lady uses in the amount of water, and I'm saying she's average, but I would say it's probably average, looking at that 10, 12,000 gallons or whatever, and use some scenarios on that.
We're going to also, though, listen to what Attorney Anderson said,
Right.
and from a staff perspective, we recommend it not be viewed as a reimbursement, but
That's true.
as a compensation.
As a goodwill gesture.
As a goodwill gesture. It will take staff some time to plot this on GIS, so at this point, I would suggest not guaranteeing a meeting, but at one of the meetings in March, as staff, we will do this as quickly as possible, but I don't want to, with all the people in the audience tonight, guarantee and if we don't have it available for that night, but we'll work as diligently and quickly as we can.
Yes, Trustee Bond.
Could I raise one more question or ask for an opinion? The filter systems that you find that are designed to filter the water that goes into a house. Could you offer an opinion on how useful they might be in a scenario like this? You know, we could look at providing a device like that at a reduced or at no cost, and that would provide an ongoing solution.
I have limited knowledge on those systems. I've not used them. I mean, I've spoken to people that have them. They do work to some level of effectiveness. I think like many items, the results are dependent on the personal tastes of the user. So some people might find a certain result very good, where others may find that same result not so good. They are effective. I could not tell you the cost of an in-home system. It's something we could look into and just provide for information.
I think it would be a good idea to have Director Pubitz come back with that information. So, any other comments?
Just one more comment. If you have the information logged in regards to water quality complaints that you've gotten over the last few years, or surges that you've done, do you have that stuff stored, that data, outside of this area or in this area? But I'm trying to get a grasp on people who have problems, because once you start sending goodwill gestures to some, you better be prepared for more people to show up.
Many.
If the work was logged under our work order system, the pub work software that you may have heard of, I could give you some list. I would not tell you that it's a complete list. Many times we generate those services just by writing down the person's name, phone number, calling them up and going out and doing it. One of the great challenges is not always collecting data, but managing data, and that is quite honestly something that we have had to put on the back burner more often than not. So I wouldn't want to tell you that I have absolutely complete records of all the surges and flushes and other things that we've done.
Hey, another quick one for Director Zopel. Is it possible that on your water bill you put like a chart, like your ComEd and NICOR, ComEd and NICOR, which shows your usage every month? Could we have that added to the bill?
Like a historical usage.
Yeah.
I think we could. Have to talk to the provider of the software and get a quote from them. But I believe that's something would be an option we could put on.
Okay. It seems like some of the history that one lady, it was the same almost every month from last year to this year, even though she's looking for compensation, which we should give her anyways. She still used the same amount of water at the same time last year.
That's right. I saw
But
that chart.
this way, if they have it on their water bill, they can say, "Oh, I didn't use that much water."
I can certainly get
At least
a
so
quote on
they
what that would take.
kind of guide for the homeowner. Does it?
Okay, anything else? We're comfortable then having Director Pubitz come back with a map, or the staff, come back with a map of the area, and also provide information on a filter type system that we perhaps could install. Is there anything else that you mentioned? Well, you wanted to have find out if we can do the software to record monthly usage.
Yeah.
So those are the three things that we'll be looking to staff to bring back to us. Is that all agreeable? And
Yes.
okay. And with that, we'll move on to